Welcome, folks. My name is Enos Andrew Wall. I'm sure you've heard of Wall Street in Salt Lake City, Wall Mansion, but I want to talk about my time here in Silver Reef. They asked me to come and discuss some of my times, and I was here about 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years, depending on how you look at it. But let me, if I can, kind of go back and kind of, tell the story as it all began. I was born in 1839 in Indiana, and at the age of 20, I left Indiana, came out west, and for the most part never went back. So I always, from that time on, considered myself a Westerner, and glad to be out here, certainly. First of all, I went to Colorado, Pikes Peak, because they had discovered gold there. It was the placer mining in creeks, like in California, and a lot of the mining that early mining that was going on in there. Now later on in Pikes Peak, or actually Cripple Creek area, in the early 1900s, they had another discovery. But anyway, this was the early one. And I learned all about mining in the 3 years I was there in Colorado. I loved it. I loved learning new things. Also, as I learned new things, or if you will, the correct way to do things, I loved thinking about better ways of doing it. Always going through my mind and thinking, is this the best way to do it? Maybe there's a better way. And I also have very keen eyesight, and that actually helped me a lot in the future. I learned to, from a distance, tell what different minerals look like. So, and that was a very important thing back then, especially for prospecting. It's one thing to go in after a mineral deposit has been discovered, but if you can kind of be the first one to find where there is a mineral deposit, it really does give you an advantage in terms of making a claim. Now after that, like I said, I was there about roughly 3 years. I moved to Montana, and I didn't mind hard work. I loved hard work. I liked the work of mining. But I kind of soon realized that if I was going to end up dressing like this, having a little bit more in life, it wasn't going to be as a miner. Here in Silver Reef, miners earn $4 a day. Now, of course, that was 4 times more than a labor would get, like a farm labor. But still, that wasn't enough money to really buy a house, have a wife and kids and things like that, which everybody wanted back then. So I decided, and I had various partners, but I decided that what I needed to do was to, and sometimes this term is used, mine the miners. In other words, bring the miner supplies, bring them what they needed, and of course, mark up the amount of money that we asked for it, and you can make a pretty good living that way, actually much better than working as a miner. So we did that, and starting out, we did the short runs. In other words, as short of a run as you can make it, getting supplies, wheat, grain, food for the miners, things like that. It was the safest way to go because that was a risky business. That's why there were opportunities there, because not everybody wanted to do it. And that's why it was very important, if you will, to kind of power up, so to speak, in terms of your weaponry. Right off the bat, we bought what weapons we could afford. A lot of ammunition, because most of my free time I practiced and practiced and practiced, because the further out you could accurately shoot, the safer you would be. And really, the safer someone else would be. If somebody was approaching 300 yards out, that was always my goal. And with this Henry rifle I have, I certainly could do that. Or I ended up getting, I might say. I couldn't afford that right off the bat. But with the Henry rifle, you could do that, and you could fire some warning shots. And so you might, they would realize that you could kill them if you wanted to, so they better back off, give you some room, and maybe find somebody easier to take advantage of. But anyway, eventually Brigham Young passed an edict that said that the pioneers, the farmers, the ranchers and such couldn't do business with outsiders. So that made it very difficult for us because those are the people that we bought the supplies from and brought them to the miners. So what we did is we just kind of started drifting further south to where that edict hadn't hit yet, or further out in the field where people had not heard about that yet. So we kept the trade going, trade business going, but what happened is it kind of forced us to move, if you will, and serve various mining camps all up and down Utah, and also allowed me, now I hadn't left my love of mining, that's for sure, because as we traveled around to different mining camps and such, I always had my ear open. I was looking to see if there was some possibilities of mineralization that someone else hadn't discovered. And as it turned out, I made claims all up and down Utah. And indeed, that's how I found out about Silver Reef. Now, by the time I got to Silver Reef, the big money interest, you had the New York money and you had the California money. And back then, that's what primarily financed mining around the West. Because an individual, it was tough to come up with all the money, to buy all the things that was needed, the powder, the carts, the animals, all that. So it was hard for an individual to finance that. But I had saved my money over these years because this was 1878. So by 1878, I had a pretty sizable reserve of money, and I was able to do that. And I came in and actually I read the claims between the big money interest, and I found that they left a little gap. You had 3 big claims to the north, that was the New York money. Then you had 2 big claims to the south, that was the California money on the Buckeye Reef right out here, and I kind of snuck in right between them and made my claim, called it the Kinner claim, or Kinner mine, as it was later referred to. Now starting off, things was great. I had 30 men working for me. We were digging down, we were hitting ore, we were making a lot of money. The boys liked to brag that they thought that the ore was going to go straight down to hell. Well, in a way, that kind of happened here in Silver Reef, but I'll discuss that a little bit later. First of all, I wanted to talk about actually the best thing that ever happened to me in my life happened here at Silver Reef. And I believe this story has been told a little bit before by some of the ghosts, but so it isn't an uncommon one. But I met my wife here, Mary Mayer. She was the daughter of a fellow that had good experience in mining in California. He was actually born in Bavaria, but came to the United States. She was born in San Francisco. But now they were here in Silver Reef, and he helped me out in my mine, and so that we were around each other a lot, and in time we just swept each other off our feet. She was 18 and I was 40, and she thought that I looked mighty stately. By that time, my boys had been calling me Colonel. I was not in the Civil War. As I mentioned, I left in 1860 to move out west, but they thought I looked like one. So they started calling me Colonel, and actually that title stuck with me throughout my whole life. Even in my obituary, they called me Colonel Wall. So it seems like a lot of the owners and big men here in Silver Reef, they were either captains, colonels, or in Barbie's case, he was a judge, so they would always refer to him with that title. And so anyway, once I proposed to her, she was very excited, to say the least, and so was I, about getting married. And we decided to pack up her family and go up to Salt Lake City and get married there, because the Catholic Church was still about a month away from being completed. So she was just so excited. She couldn't wait a month. I would have loved to get married here in Silver Reef, but she couldn't wait. So we went up to Salt Lake City and tied the knot up there and then came back down. Now, unfortunately, the bad times here in Silver Reef were actually that same year. That was 1879. Captain Lubbock of the Christie Mill claimed that the Kenner mine, or that I owed him money. So he actually went to the courts, convinced them of that, and so they made an order to close the mine until the issue could be resolved. Well, first of all, that seems very strange, because that's not the way things worked with the mills. What you did is you took your ore in, they processed your ore. Before you got anything, they took out what they were owed in the silver and gave you what was left. So I really don't know how I worked up a bill, and I disputed it, and it was fought about for some time afterwards. But probably the most tragic thing about this incident, because eventually it was resolved and the mine was reopened again, was that I had paid someone when they shut our mine down. I paid someone to make sure that nobody got in the mine. Actually, I had a claim up in the vicinity of Salt Lake City, up in the mountains near there. And someone, because as I mentioned, I did the mercantile trade, someone broke into the mine and they stole items and maybe some more. It's really hard to tell with things like that, what they steal. But I didn't want that to happen to this mine. So I hired a guy, a friend of mine, Jack Trudy. He was a big guy. He was kind of vocal. I'm not going to say he was drunk all the time. He was just one of those individuals that kind of acted like he was drunk most of the time. But anyway, very loud. So anyway, apparently the town, now you have to remember that towns back then had marshals. And the people who hired the marshals were usually the mill owners, the big mine owners, big money as I refer to. And they were primarily hiring these people to look after their interests. So the town marshal's name back then was John Diamond. Now he was also a deputy sheriff, so he had some more credentials than just town marshal. But he came up to the mine, and the papers, I believe, had already been served, or at least we knew about the stop work, and so he had stopped mining. But he demanded to go in the mine, and Jack Trudy, being a good guard, as I had hired him to, refused to let him in. And of course, Jack, being Jack, added some extra insultive words, and a lot of my boys were just hanging around the mine because they had nothing to do. They weren't going to get jobs at other mills, other mines, and ours was closed at the time. So they hurled insults at John Diamond as he went back to Silver Reef. Well, a few days later, there was a trial there. Jack Trudy went into the courtroom, which was actually the back room of a saloon. So it's maybe kind of hard to tell where the saloon began and ended and where the courtroom did. But John Diamond, the marshal, yelled at him to take his hat off, respect the court. And Jack Trudy then turned and yelled, well, I'll take my hat off, or you make me, something like that. Anyway, there were words, and they went outside to apparently resolve the issue. Now, what happened was, I think, more your traditional shootout in the West. You've seen, at least I think some of you seen, is what Hollywood has come up with. And for the most part, that's not what happened. The sheriff didn't stand there with his flexing his hand and the bad guy. They went out in the street. They were both grabbing at each other, tussling a little bit. Then they both drew for their guns, fired almost at the same time, hit each other, and both men eventually ended up dead. John Diamond almost instantly, and Jack Trudy later on. Now, when they did the autopsy, now the initial eye reports was that both men emptied both of their pistols, and since John Diamond, since he was almost killed instantly, that's kind of hard to do. But in any case, there was firing all over. And afterwards, when they inspected the bodies, they found that there were bullet holes all over both the front and the back of both men, and a different caliber than the guns they were using. So that's a shootout in the Old West. It's more like a gang violence, I think, than right against wrong. But it was still, everybody agreed on one thing, that those two men shouldn't have died. It was a very sad occurrence, and it's just kind of hard to keep a smile on your face when somebody in your employ, ends up dead, and the town marshal too. So now from there, things got worse. About a year later, my mine started mysteriously filling with water. No one else's was, but mine was filling up with water. Also, the prices, now everybody suffered this, the price of silver got cut in half. So all of a sudden, the amount of money that you thought that you were going to get from your mine, from your ore, you weren't going to get. You're only going to get half of it. And also there was a fault out there on Buckeye Reef that diminished a lot of the gain, so our ore's going down also. Well, to make a long story short, my credit gets extended, my local credit does. All these things kind of, had really taxed my finances, my operating funds that I had for the mine. And then the rumor mill started. And of course, the rumor mill is aimed at the independent guy, not the big money interest. The Kinner mine is going down, they're going bankrupt, all that stuff. Well, all of a sudden, the townspeople, a lot of my creditors, they demand their money. So, which I didn't have because it's a process. You mine, you take the ore out, you have a process, you pay people off. But they immediately demanded their money, and they put me under house arrest in the Harrison House Hotel, which is actually, I believe, our only hotel in town here. Well, I've always been a man of principle, and I hate people that cheat and such like that. But to be quite truthful, how am I supposed to pay people off when you put me under house arrest and treat me that way? I was no outlaw, bandit. I was, I was not trying to cheat anybody, and I didn't think that personally. I didn't think that treatment was very fair. So actually, in the meantime, my wife and her family left town. And a few days later, I shinnied down the drain spout in the Harrison house. I had a friend with a buckboard come around the back. I jumped in the buckboard and made my escape from Silver Reef. Now, on the way out of town, I made pledge to everybody who was around there that someday I would pay them off, because the last thing I wanted to do was to cheat the honest businessman and stuff who had been kind enough to give me credit. And I'm proud to say that eventually I was able to do that. I was able to pay them off. Now, people a lot of times say, well, how'd you get a street named after you in Salt Lake City? And how did you get that mansion in Salt Lake City? Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Bingham Canyon open pit mine. The largest open pit mine in the world, matter of fact. Over the years, it's brought in millions and millions and millions of dollars. About 10 years ago, in its heyday, just as a byproduct, you know, kind of a waste, just as a byproduct, it was bringing in 100 ounces of gold a year. So that's especially today's price of gold is $2,000 an ounce. So that's a lot of money, just as a byproduct. But anyway, when I finally sold all of my interest, because I was more or less the one that discovered the copper deposits in that mine. And that's always been the mainstay of the mine. It's been technically a copper mine. And I'm the one that initially, back in the late 1800s, discovered the copper deposits. A lot of the local people thought I was crazy. They just thought I was digging holes and that would not amount to anything. But anyway, when I sold my full interest in that mine, in today's dollars, it came to $102 million. So, and that made me at that time the richest man in Utah. So it was a good return, and I did some nice things with it, but quite frankly, probably our influence here in Utah was undermined a little bit because I died in 1820. I was 81. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1920. Well, you know, when you've been dead 100 years, it's hard to get those or it's easy to get those decades or centuries messed up. But anyway, yeah, in 1920, and my daughters by that time had moved to California, and they told my wife that California was the place we ought to be, so they dug up my casket. They moved to Beverly. I went to Hollywood Hills, Hollywood Forever Cemetery, by the way. They still had movie stars, but no swimming pools. So anyway, that's why probably, other than the street and the mansion, our name isn't too prominent anymore in Utah, because quite frankly, our family just up and moved out. So they went to where the weather was better. At least they thought. But I always loved Utah, spent most of my adult life there, and you know, quite frankly, had it been left up to me, I would still be buried in Salt Lake City.